So, hi, I'm Anwin. I'm going to be doing my presentation on what kind of people are used by dictatorial regimes according to the film The Cremator. So, I first of all made a kind of like two camps of what some of the critics are saying about it. While not all these people think in a binary way, it's very easy to find discourse within how the cremator Kopf himself is viewed. So I put in some examples from the film to back up critical views here. The first is Kachyňa. He's the strongest critic on this, where he says the cremator is a parrot, and he essentially starts as a tabula rasa and is just parroting back everything that the Nazis give to him. So that's especially evident in this scene where Ranke will just say something into his ear about what it is that the Jews in the funeral hall said, which, by the way, the fact it was set in a funeral hall I find very interesting, because that's kind of the moment when Kopf is reincarnated in a way into this like right-wing cremator. So I found that interesting first of all, but he just completely parrots it back. Whatever he says, he's like, yes, that happened, and the beautiful music, and it's very interesting, the view of a tabula rasa, when what you also have is an incredibly complex, multifaceted character, which these critics speak about on the manipulation of inner desires. The idea of a tabula rasa gives him some form of plausible deniability, like something that could be completely molded into a shape without him having any agency within it. And I don't think he should necessarily be afforded that in terms of people who are used by dictatorships. It's clear that the dictatorial regime used somebody who is unstable, fascinated with death, purification, and order, and twisted those ideals into something more depraved than they already were. These two camps themselves are not necessarily at odds with each other, no matter whether Kopf parroted things back to Ranke or whether he was completely twisted from the outset. His descent into madness is characterized by his desire to feel special, noticed, and to be seen as the archetype of the patriarchal provider, even if that antithetically means killing his own family. There were a couple of other things I picked up on in terms of him being a parrot, one of them being when Ranke says that Millie is too effeminate, and the only time the word effeminate is then also used is a couple of scenes later when the cremator refers to Fennec as effeminate, which I think is interesting in terms of how even language develops throughout the film. And also in the opening credits, there's a scene wherein Kopf head is like on paper and ripped apart, leaving a blank space in the middle where his brain would be, which then the credits go. And I thought that as a stylistic choice was very interesting for him as this tabula rasa figure. But I do think he's incredibly complex, and it is the ultimate manipulation of what it means to be a patriarchal provider. That's my take. So this is a series of photos that I found very interesting. You can see this like kind of disconcerting and like wistful smile that he has as the Nazis salute him, and he waves back before making a conscious decision to salute in a way that to him clearly is a noble act for him to do. But then the woman, most likely the anthropomorphism of the angel of death, appears, surrounded by the Nazis, and it's only then that he lowers his hand. She is often seen in turning points of suffering within the movie, making him question his consciousness, but he puts it out of sight and out of mind. And when I was rewatching the movie, I found that face that he pulls so interesting in terms of like dictatorial regimes manipulating those who want community or want to feel special, because that is just that kind of like, oh, I finally fit in somewhere type beat. So on this one, I think it's not just a film about Nazis. While it is set at the end of the Czechoslovak Republic as it was taken over by Nazi Germany, the movie was filmed during a partial era of freedom of expression until the Soviets took over in August 1968. Did it skip a slide actually? It did. There we go. The propaganda posters used for both the Nazi Party and the boxing club are reminiscent of contemporary Soviet propaganda, and they're both very, very similar to each other. And Millie is incredibly susceptible. He's another type of person who could be used by these regimes based on his vulnerability and naivety. He just hears something and it's this kind of like, well, they said to join us, so I did. Something very interesting is that there was this lost ending that Herz detailed in an interview. In this ending, former crematorium employees were chatting in a coffee shop about how Kopf was always a very nice and abstinent man. Soviet tanks roll by as they're chatting, and a building blows up, and then distorted faces are seen in the reflection of the shards of glass in the rubble. The cremator can then be seen smiling from the crowd, and this was removed by the studio director for being too critical of the incumbent Soviet government, especially with their crackdown on films and the later banning of the cremator itself under that Soviet government. this is hugely important in how the Cremator fits into a dictatorial regime, because it proves it's not just Nazism, it's everything. It's not a warning against the strongest Nazi leaders, especially with Herz having experienced the Holocaust himself. It's not a warning against the loudest voices or even just the Nazis. It demonstrates that conformists exist forever, no matter the ideology, and that it is quiet normality within conformism that we should be afraid of. The ending that made the final cut is still different to that in which the novel is based, with Herz's Kopfverkindel evolving into a new form, with his realised ambitions fusing with the Nazi Party for ultimate destruction or salvation during this kind of like strange Buddhist rapture he seemed to be in. Final slide. I don't know why it skipped, but it did. This brings me to the point on the inherent issues with everyday people, because there's often this kind of, when you first think about who's used by the regime in terms of especially the film The Cremator, you think about the Cremator himself as this kind of like very depraved or very like odd man who is manipulated with his desires into being something else. But it's not just that, it's the everyday people and it's apathy. Everyday people both have a voice and a use. The silent majority and the passivity of many characters within the film not only allows a loud minority to take over, but also somewhat leaves a silent majority in support of the regime. This is very much a modern day issue in terms of apathy, and that reflects the importance of the Cremator to modern day issues and regimes that we may experience. The everyday person has the capacity to be Kopfverkindel, and although they might not share his depravity and strange interests, they could be persuaded to share a vision or at least to bear witness to it, which sometimes can be even more damning. So I found some very interesting analysis on, the couple who are always late everywhere, always arguing, serving as a Greek chorus to the main cast actions and silent witnesses to the events, while the passivity of Maria and Millie in terms of their deaths. I think Maria's death, it seems that she almost willfully goes, and it is that kind of apathy towards even the most destructive thing that could happen to her that makes everyday people so important in terms of regimes, and their voice is so important and when they're used. And Reinke as well, he is such a steadfast Nazi and such a fundamental crux in this movie in terms of, converting the Cremator, if that's how we're choosing to say it. But at the end of the day, he's just a low-level Nazi official. There's thousands of him out there. And then also, as much as it's not a film about Nazis, but it's intended to show the Nazi Party. But running throughout the plot are lots of Soviet and socialist ideas. For example, the names of the employees at the crematorium, they're all named after like small animals, which is very interesting and a derivative of the socialist idea that the working class will always be beaten down, always be prey for the higher classes or the middle class. And that's very interesting in terms of people that are used, having them quite literally, the nomenclature be that they are these very petty, insignificant creatures is more of a Soviet idea applied to a contemporary Soviet government than it is an inherently Nazi one, which again I found interesting. And then finally, ultimately, it is fear and distrust that sows those seeds. Reinke saying this is what Jews do, they get into the family and therefore this is what your wife does, forming fear within familial bonds, making love and affection something to be afraid of. And everyone feels love and everyone feels affection, and therefore it is those everyday people who can also be used by those regimes. So I guess the answer to the original question is fundamentally, unfortunately, everyone, but especially Kopfverkindel, both as this tabula rasa and as this depraved man to be manipulated. That's everything I have.
Thank you very much. Have anything to ask? Want to ask anything? Sorry, my English isn't very good today. Comment? Well, thank you very much. I would just add one small thing. Let's close this maybe and find. Okay. Right. That was quick. We could almost go home already, which will probably do, but that's the email. And where was I here? And also Moodle. Right? Come on. Here. So I just wanted to say a little bit, a few more things about Kopferkingo, which is basically, well, yes, he is a parrot, very well kind of noted, very good. But at the same time, there's this there are multiple contradictions in him, in the sense that he really presents himself as being incredibly decent at the beginning. I mean, I suppose he presents himself as being incredibly decent throughout the film, even as a Nazi. He presents himself as being incredibly decent, because since the regime has changed, what is now Nazi is what you're supposed to do, so that's decent, isn't it? So it kind of goes in line with this image of him, well, being nice, but at the same time, he actually, as you rightly pointed out, has kind of abolished all his red lines. Because, I mean, and he is incredibly under the influence of Reinke, and when in that Nazi club they tell him your wife will have problems because she's half Jewish or whatever, or she's Jewish and your son is half Jewish, he just basically absolutely brutally and ruthlessly kills them. But at the same time, I don't know to what we have to have a sort of slight warning, because there are these weird characters that appear throughout the film, especially the dark girl, who is some kind strange sort of conscience of his. And also there is this madness about the Dalai Lama, and him, another version of him being kind of inviting him, the Dalai Lama has died and you have to go to Lhasa now, or whatever, you know. So you could normally say, because this is a film on the borderline of kind of madness on the whole, that a normal person probably would normal person who would discover, who would want to be a Nazi and discover that half of his family is Jewish or half Jewish, would start killing them ruthlessly. There is also this important aspect that he is gradually going mad. And actually one of the Nazis towards the end of the film is telling him, are you all right, Mr. Kopferkingo, whatever, so because he's starting, that's one of his raving things. But what I mainly wanted to point out is that there is this contradiction not only between him trying to sort of present how incredibly nice he is, but he's incredibly controlling from the start, which kind of manifests itself by taking people by the neck. Not only his son, which is also disgusting, but even that man in the crematorium who eventually hangs himself. He's played by the well-known Oscar-winning director Jiří Menzel there. And of course, the other thing is that he keeps combing the hair of the dead people, and then using the same combing everybody else. So these are kind of little symbolic figures which just hint to his madness. So I suppose a protest film made in '68 against sort of dictatorships, and as you rightly said, any dictatorship, because at that point about those Czech names of those underlings in that crematorium being small animals, that's a very interesting point, yes. You got it in some literature, or what?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Again, I really appreciate the way you do these presentations, because you really do very good research. Okay, if nobody else has anything to say, I'll say a few words about tomorrow's film. There was another, this is a film by this man, Karel Kachyňa. I mean, because there is this sort of laziness of British university professors, they've invented this reading week. So next week we've got a reading week, no classes. I absolutely don't understand why this needs to take place, but whatever. So anyway, seminars for tomorrow's class will be on the Tuesday thereafter, because week 6 there is no teaching. But so I couldn't put the sort of two of Kachyňa's films in, but nevertheless the other one, Coach to Vienna, is also an absolutely brilliant film. I do recommend, well, and even if you wanted to write your essay about two Kachyňa's films, feel free, and you would probably find it quite stimulating, because they are absolutely brilliant films. That coach to Vienna is actually, I'll mention that briefly here. It takes place in the last week of the Second World War. Basically, there's a Czech girl, whose husband was executed by by the Gestapo for stealing a couple of sacks of cement. So she's absolutely anti-German and anti-Nazi. And then two deserters from the German army appear, and they ask her for a coach and horses, and they want her to get her to Vienna before the Russian soldiers come, so that they don't end up in Russian sort of prison as Russian prisoners of war. And basically, of course, this is a film also made in the sort of around 68, and that was still a time when the experience of the Second World War was very raw, and there was obviously this nationalism, and there was this kind of hatred of Germans as such. And this film absolutely crosses against it, and in fact, it had fairly negative reviews. It was written by this liberal writer, original communist, Jan Procházka, who was a very good collaborator with this director, Karel Kachyňa. And somehow this Jan Procházka was a protege of the communist president Novotný. So he actually allowed them to make that film, but it was really a problem, because basically what happens during that ride, she actually decides to take revenge on those Germans, like collective guilt again, right? Of these two young men. And one of them is wounded, and throughout the film he dies. But the other one actually isn't even German, he's Austrian. And while she wants basically to kill them and drives them through this unending forest, there's classical music, which in the film, which puts it into a level of a kind of classical work. Basically, they gradually realize that they are human beings, that young Austrian boy and this girl, and basically they abandon the hatred, or she abandons the hatred, and they basically sort of discover that they are human beings, and they befriend each other. And at the end of the film, which must have been a real slap to the Czech consciousness, they actually, the other boy dies. They actually lie down in that carriage and embrace each other. They don't have sex, but they just affectionately embrace each other and sleep there. And they are discovered by Czech partisans. I mean, there were no Czech partisans during the Second World War. Everybody was afraid. So Czech partisans started existing 3 days before the end of the Second World War, right? Absolute brilliant heroism, right? So they are discovered by these Czech partisans who say, this whore is sleeping here with this Nazi. They kill the boy and rape the girl, and that's the end of the film. So this is not a film which is a part of the program, but it is brilliant. The other brilliant film was made and also shot, I think it was finished in 1970. It's called The Ear, and that's the film that we're going to see tomorrow, also by Karel Kachyňa, also written by Procházka. And that is a brilliant study of a kind of middle-aged marriage, husband and wife, who are getting on each other's nerves. The husband is a communist government minister. And the film isn't actually set exactly when in the communist era it takes place. If it takes place in the 1950s, that government minister is seriously in danger, because they come home from a government president's party, discover that the electricity is off and the doors are open, and they gradually discover that there was the secret police, and he narrowly escaped arrest for no good reason, right? And this is what it's all about. And had it been in the early 50s, that would have been really serious, because they would have killed him possibly as a minister, because they did that. Had it been in the late 50s, maybe they would just sentence him to prison. A few words. So anyway, it's an absolute brilliant stuff, and you'll see it tomorrow. And here, this is what Fabiano Golgo has written for us. Now, Fabiano Golgo is a Brazilian who's been living in the Czech Republic for about 20 years, and he's a sociologist. He's very knowledgeable, and also knowledgeable about these films from the 60s. And he started writing for us. I do this Czech website. Suddenly, these reviews of the past a couple of weeks or whatever, and they are very informative. And this is one of them, automatically translated into English. When talking about the Czechoslovak New Wave, that's the stuff from the 60s, people usually recall the grotesque rebellion of the daisies, of the women, melancholy calm of intimate lighting, or the epic ferocity of the medieval film Markéta Lazarova. But the ear is something else. A film that refuses to laugh, refuses to escape into poetry or lyrical imagery, and instead locks us into a single night, a single villa, a marriage that is falling apart under the weight of fear. It is a film that literally gets under your skin because it acts as a mirror, not of the greatest heroic deeds, but of the darkest everyday life under totalitarianism, well, dictatorship. I actually think that its meaning is even more general. You could say, this is a film that asks the question, when you get any position of influence or power under any regime or in any political situation, to what extent are you do have to compromise with the powers that be? When you graduate from here and get a job, hopefully there will still be some jobs and not all taken away by AI. You will discover that you may need to do similar compromises as the man in this film. Hopefully you will not be threatened by death, but yes, unfortunately, working in sort of jobs means you may think of this film anyway. Karel Kachyňa has made a film that is seemingly intimate but internally monumental. The story takes place during a single night after a party at the ministry. The main characters, official Ludwig and his wife Anna, return home and discover that their house has apparently been searched during their absence. The phone isn't working, the gate is open, and there's a silence around them that sounds more threatening than any sound. The viewer knows exactly as much as they do that something is in the air and someone could come and arrest them at any moment, and it's not just about their comfort but their lives. In fact, these are government villas, very fancy villas, and the next villa is inhabited by another minister, and they were arrested, right? What in another film might be a thriller turns into a study of paranoia and disintegration. The couple first argue about trivialities, mock each other, and reproach each other for marital betrayals and embarrassing episodes. But the longer the night drags on, the clearer it becomes that their private lives and political reality are inextricably intertwined. Fear of the regime is not just an external pressure, it seeps into their relationship, distorts their intimacy, and reveals that marriage, like the entire political system, is based on mistrust, lies, and power. The greatest strength of the ear lies in its bleak intimacy. Karel Čapicky's camera is constantly close to the actors' faces, following them in the dark corners of the house, bringing their despair and anger closer. The darkness is not just a backdrop, it is an environment that swallows every gesture and every glance. It's a film in which candlelight or a small light bulb acts as a last resort against an invisible enemy. And yet it is not just about the psychology of the two characters. If the film is an indictment of an entire system that has turned even the intimate space of marriage into a battlefield. Kachyňa and screenwriter Jan Procházka accurately capture how the regime works, not with dramatic gestures, but with a constant feeling that you are being watched, that they know everything about you, that your slightest weakness can be used against you. In this sense, The Ear is a political horror film, a horror film that needs no visible enemy, because the enemy is everywhere and above all inside you. This is a question of collaboration, right? This is just an introduction. Hope I haven't depressed you too much, but it is a very good film. You will see tomorrow. Yeah. Just an afterthought. You are historians. You're not from SMLC. Of anyone studying languages. I just wanted to, with my rants about AI, depress you with, if you were students of languages. This is an automated translation from Czech, right? I hadn't touched it. That's frightening, isn't it? Anyway, I think we can stop now unless you have any questions. Okay, see you tomorrow at 10. Thank you.